to start off with a number of thank yous. Firstly is just to the Nuffield network and CSIRO for developing the partnership that has got me here today to create greater links between CSIRO and Nuffield. What's happening now is there's one CSIRO scientist being embedded on a GFP each year, and I had the privilege of going on the India GFP last year. Even luckier in that was I didn't have to do the personal tour, I didn't have to write a report. I got the good gig. So what I'm going to do today is actually talk to you about what we do at CSIRO in my group and why we do it and why we think that we're adding value. And so we work in the healthy cereal space. Also, need to thank my wife Tanya and my kids Alex and Samantha, who allowed me to disappear for 8 weeks and go and see the world and have a lot of fun leaving them at home, dealing with everything else. A little bit about me. It's Nuffield, so I have to get dairy in. My grandparents were dairy farmers. My uncle was a dairy farmer. Got that out of the way. But I have not lived on a farm. I've had no desire to be a farmer, but I do work in agricultural research. This is me. This is as close as I get to the farm. Is on one of our trials in Yanco a couple of years ago. Paul, who's in the middle, is actually looking really apprehensive because I'm in the field and he knows the potential that I can do to stuff things up that he's spent the last 3-4 months managing and getting right. So that's as far as I get in terms of the agricultural chain. But we do the research. What we do is we look at product differentiation and new opportunities for cereals. We have 2 aspects of this. One is around health differentiation, looking at health through dietary products, and we're specifically targeting colorectal cancer and diabetes. But we also link with the nutritional capability in CSIRO to actually substantiate the benefits of the grains that we're developing. The other side of the research, which I'm not going to talk about much today, is also about superior qualities. Can we have better milling yield? Can we have better consistency of quality across seasons? And also, can we increase the nutrient values of the grains? Why do we want to do this? The global market for wheat and barley is becoming more and more competitive. If you actually look at the numbers using a really crude measure of tonnes per hectare average for countries, Australia sits at about 2 tonnes per hectare average at the moment. US and Canada are 3, some of our European competitors are 9, 10 tonnes per hectare. It doesn't matter how good and how efficient you are, if you're not producing as much, there's a point where you start to lose competitiveness. And it's at the other aspect of that is South America and the Black Sea are raising their production capacity. Between those 2 areas, in 1992, they exported 5 billion tonnes into the global market. In 2013, it was 30 million tonnes. Ukrainian wheat now delivers to Indonesia for $20 a tonne less than Australian wheat. So we're not competing on price. We just can't go there. So we have to have a differentiator. So what I'm going to talk about now is what we're doing in the health space and addressing some problems that we see. So in Australia, about 65% of people are now classified as overweight and 29% are obese. The other thing is we have major, what we call diseases of affluence. Type 2 diabetes is one of these. It impacts about 1.7 million people in Australia. The total economic cost, so that's healthcare, loss of productivity, carers, in 2013 was 9 billion Australian dollars. So that's lost productivity for the economy. The really scary thing is 58% of those cases are preventable with the right diet. The same thing with colorectal cancer. Nearly 4,500 people a year now die from colorectal cancer. How many times do you hear a news report on someone dying from colorectal cancer? What about a car crash? You hear all the car crashes, 3 times as many people die from colorectal cancer than car crashes. And this is even worse. 70% of people that get colorectal cancer probably could have avoided it by diet. So we've got this problem of how do we get people to eat a proper diet and reduce the cost and impact of these diseases. A lot of time has been spent trying to get people to change their diets, and for a lot of people that just doesn't work. It's really, really hard to change long-term what people eat. The other area where we see this coming is also looking over the fence to Asia. there's massive population growth going on in China and India. So there are new markets emerging. There's one estimate down about by 2030 there could be 1.5 billion people in the middle class in Asia. That's an Asian definition of middle class, so about 30,000 Australian dollars a year in annual income. It's not our definition. They want more protein, more value-added foods, and there's an increase in these diseases of affluence. 100 million people in China with diabetes now, 500 million in a pre-diabetic state. Huge, huge market. So the concept we use in our group is let's not change the diet, let's do health by stealth. Imagine if that hamburger bun was actually healthy for you and it could help protect against diabetes and colorectal cancer. We don't work with meat, we don't work with dairy, so I can't do the rest of it. But let's make that bun healthy and hope other parts of the industries are working in the same space. So within the group, we have a pipeline of projects in the improved human health and nutrition. We're working around high amylose wheat and barley, which I'm going to talk to about today, ultra-low gluten barley, and then further down the pipeline we've got high beta-glucan wheat, and that's trying to make wheat so you can make the same claims as you can with oats. You can make a heart health claim around wheat like you see on all your Uncle Toby's oats packets. And then we're also looking at biofortification. So what are we doing in the first space? And why do we want to target that with around colorectal cancer and diabetes? So what we want to do is we want to change the starch composition to increase the level of what's called resistant starch. And this is the pre-lunch version, so you just get the cartoon, you don't get the full graphic. But there are two key components of resistant starch. One, it's called resistant starch. It resists digestion in your stomach. That's why it's called resistant starch. So you don't get the glucose hit released in the stomach. You don't get as high levels of glucose in your bloodstream. You can manage diabetes. The second is it actually passes all the way through to your large bowel, and it ferments there. That changes the pH in your bowel, which is protective against bowel cancer. It changes the gut microflora. There are drawbacks that you can actually only eat so much of these products in a day. I've had a very bad experience one day where we were showing this off and I missed lunch and I ate 6 of the bars, and it was a really uncomfortable flight back from Sydney to Canberra because of fermentation. So the first project in this space is work done by Zhongyi Li in the group, and it's around Barley Max. And it was changing the starch composition in the grain. So the key thing here is amylose, which is the second set of bars from the left, is what we targeted to change. We thought we knew what we were doing, but like any system, when you change one thing, you change a whole lot of other things as well. So all the things to the right are actually positive health change that we didn't target, but they have potentially positive health effects. In terms of analogy, this is sort of like going in to bet on the favourite at the Melbourne Cup and coming out having won the trifecta but not actually knowing how you did it or what you bet on. So this is the first product, and we got these positive health effects. We've done clinical trials, we've done substantiation of these trials. The product has been launched commercially, so the first products were launched in 2009, and it started off really well, and then it had a slow evolution after that for the next 5-6 years, partly because, like all things, when you go into a new adventure, a new business, you make mistakes. We've been learning from those mistakes. So in 2015, the whole business was actually restructured, and a Japanese investor, Teijin, who makes body armour, plane parts, health products, wanted to get into healthy foods. So they put money into the company, and with their investment, products were launched in the US in 2017. There's now been 21 products launched in Japan. Most of those products were launched through doors that have been knocked on and weren't open to CSIRO or Australian company. With a Japanese multinational backing us, the doors suddenly opened. So it's a really good lesson in making sure you have the right partner as well. The thing here is how many people actually consume barley on a regular basis, and that's not including beer. As a food, how many of you consume wheat on a regular basis? Yeah. So much bigger impact if we can do the same thing in wheat. And so this is work led by Ahmed Regina, and this was a partnership between CSIRO, GRDC and Lima Grain, which set up a company that's commercialising this called Arista. Not going into the details, but again, we have increased the total dietary fibre in the grain by 2 to 3-fold, depending on the type of flour you make. And we've also increased the resistant starch by more than 10-fold. So we were able to replicate what we've done in barley in wheat. The question then is, can we actually make the products that we want? So we get our health by stealth, we don't change the look, the feel, the taste of the products. The answer is yes, we can, and the amount of the positive health benefit correlates very strongly with how much of what we call high amylose wheat flour that you incorporate into the product. It works in white flour, it works in wholemeal flour, it works in whole grain products. So this is now moving forward, and first commercialisation is actually happening in the US by a company called Baystate Milling. The wheat is growing in the US now, and they're about to launch their flours into the market in November. The last project I want to touch on today is about beer. And this is targeting a completely different market altogether. So targeting a gluten-free barley for celiacs and gluten intolerance. Again, this is work supported by GRDC. They invested for the long term, spent 10 years investing in this project, and now it's being carried forward by the Healthy Grain in the food aspects, which is the company that's commercialising Barley Max. Why we wanted to get into this space is celiac disease is a disease that the only known cure is to stop consuming gluten. And it affects about 1% of the population globally. So that's 70 million people in terms of our market size. Since we started the project, things have taken off, and there are a lot. Gluten-free became trendy. That market size is now about 10 times larger. But the core market is that 1% of the population. It's a big market, $10 to $14 billion globally. And why we wanted to get into the space originally is the gluten-free foods were low in fibre, low in iron, low in minerals, high in sugar and fat. So it was very, very common in the early 2000s to get diagnosed with celiac disease and then suddenly go from underweight to overweight in 6 months because the products had 20% sugar and 20% fat in them. So you changed your diet completely. We targeted barley as a product, very, very targeted research. We said we're not working on wheat, we're not working on rye, we're going to work on barley. Can we make it gluten-free? The slide summarises work from starting in 2003, so it's a slow process this, that in 2009, so 6 years of work, we had 1 seed of barley with the gluten content in the target range that we're aiming, below 20 parts per million. It's a really, really ugly barley seed. It's small, it's narrow, it's shrivelled. First time I showed a bag of it to the brewers, they just laughed at me and said, we can't use that. So we recognised that, and we've been putting in place a breeding program to make the seeds larger and more like the barley that you normally see. So where do we go? We've now named it the Barley Kabari, and in 2016 Radeberger, which is the largest brewing company in Germany, launched Pioneer, which is made with 100% Kabari, and it's the first and only gluten-free beer available in the German market. We're now looking at other markets around the world, identifying key brewers that we want to work with and get products launched. We've also now developed a wholeless barley so that we can actually achieve our goal of producing foods for people with celiac disease. We know they want a beer, but beer beyond quality of life is not really a health benefit. Then finally, I just want to thank the India GFP group for embracing the stupid questions from someone who knows nothing about farming, asking what was obvious to them and not making fun of me. So thank you very much.